amigos, nada, esperamos que os guste la conferencia y nos dejan hablar. We want to talk a little bit of music too, right? Vamos a hablar de música y de su grupo. Muchas gracias por venir.
Bravo.
All right, well, I understand that most of you won't understand this next part, but I usually start things off with a little sample of what I do.
Bueno, me da la impresión de que la mayoría de la gente que hay aquí no va a entender esta primera parte, pero me gusta empezar lo que hago con una muestra, ¿no?
Listen to the chocolate sonata from Personas Non Grata with a plot to rock harder than the second intifada. I do drink fire water, but I'm more like higher water and will slaughter your armada. Influence scholars that are alma mater squalor, so my squatter pull your collar at your black and white gala. With cannon fodder for dollars, both under Bush and Obama. I'm not a baller, I'm a brawler, calling y'all to come harder. From the land of the free labor that planted the planet, the black and branded, scrambling over to Canada. A fan of radical bandits and bandanas slamming a banana clip and rat-a-tat-tat days back the grammar to scam y'all to clamor up. The damn ladder to grab for Excalibur, not a rap battler, but the next caliber. Catch the program, not just the pentameter. So, often when I'm doing interviews, one of the big questions is, do I think that my music can help to build a movement?
A menudo cuando me hacen entrevistas, la pregunta suele ser ¿crees que puedes construir o contribuir a un movimiento con la música que haces?
And the truth is, no, I don't think so.
Y la verdad es que no creo.
I think that what we're putting revolutionary politics in art is, and its importance right now is in this has the same contradiction that much of the radical left is finding at this point.
La introducción de la temática de la política revolucionaria en el arte es importante, pero creo que encierra una contradicción de la que ahora mismo adolece la izquierda radical.
And I may be speaking in extremes, but I want to back up a little bit to explain my point.
Puede que suene un poco extremista, pero quiero dejar claro lo que quiero decir.
The primary contradiction in capitalism is still at the point of labor, at the point of exploitation. It's at the point in which profit is created from the work that someone does. That's what moves the system along. That's the motor of capitalism.
La primera contradicción del capitalismo sigue siendo que su beneficio parte del trabajo o la explotación, que es el mercado laboral es la base de su beneficio y el motor de todo.
However, for the past 50 years, since the new left has come about, radicals, even those of us calling ourselves revolutionaries, have moved away from the class struggle and into more spectacle.
En los últimos 50 años de lo que es la nueva izquierda, los radicales, o los que nos autodenominamos revolucionarios, hemos abandonado un poco lo que es la lucha de clases y para derivar hacia algo más relacionado con el espectáculo.
And what I can say here is related to revolutionary movements as they existed and exist in the United States, but there are definitely, from what I understand, parallels all over the world.
Lo que voy a decir está relacionado con movimientos revolucionarios en Estados Unidos, pero creo que se pueden establecer paralelismos con todo el mundo.
in the early 20s and 30s in the United States, there were 1 million card-carrying communists in the Communist Party in the United States. Places like Montana and Idaho and Colorado and Alabama were called hotbeds of communist activity by J. Edgar Hoover.
En los primeros años 20 y 30 en Estados Unidos había 1 millón de comunistas de carnet. De hecho, Hoover denominó a Montana, Idaho, Colorado y Alabama como un semillero de comunistas.
At the same, miners were fighting their corporate bosses with guns. Workers in the Midwest were occupying their factories. There, at the same time, was a march of veterans of the First World War who wanted their bonus checks and marched in the hundreds of thousands on the White House, many of them with guns.
Había desde mineros alzándose en armas contra sus jefes hasta trabajadores del Medio Oeste ocupando fábricas, incluso una marcha de veteranos que por 100.000 o varios centenares de miles fueron a la Casa Blanca reivindicando sus cheques de veterano y muchos de ellos con armas, claro.
At the same time, as we all know, there were revolutions happening all over the world. Revolutions that people in the United States were pointing to as possible models for what could happen in the United States.
Y al mismo tiempo había revoluciones, claro está, en el resto del mundo, revoluciones a las que los estadounidenses apuntaban como un modelo de referencia para ellos mismos.
Because of the fear by the ruling class in the United States, the fear of a revolutionary movement growing. Now, mind you, there are millions of communists in the U.S. at a time when there were only 127 million people.
Bueno, hay que tener en cuenta que había varios millones de comunistas en una época en que la población de Estados Unidos ascendía a apenas 127 millones, ¿no? Y la apunta al principal temor de la clase dirigente.
Because of the fear of revolution, we got what was called the New Deal. And when I was in school, we were taught that Franklin Delano Roosevelt was a nice person, and he gave us welfare and Social Security and Medicare because he was a nice guy.
El miedo principal era la revolución, claro está, y como antídoto a eso pues se proporcionó el New Deal. De hecho, cuando yo estudiaba en el colegio me decían que Roosevelt era como un tipo genial, buenísimo, porque nos había dado la seguridad social y Medicare y cosas por el estilo.
But they did this because the working class was a lot more organized in the U.S. than they are now. After that point, during World War II, the U.S. left, the communists in the U.S. decided to have a united front against fascism to help destroy the fascists, to get rid of the Nazis.
De hecho, lo hicieron por organizar la clase obrera. O sea, durante la Segunda Guerra Mundial, la izquierda pues, se unió y hizo un frente común, lo que eran los comunistas y la izquierda contra el fascismo, ¿no? Para destruir el fascismo.
And so this meant, in practical terms, that the Communist Party stopped criticizing the United States during the 40s.
Así que en términos prácticos los comunistas dejaron de criticar a Estados Unidos durante los años 40.
It also meant that people hid their political identities, that they worked in unions without telling people anymore who they were politically and that they were revolutionaries. So this made it easier for 10 to 15 years later there to be a heavy anti-communist movement.
Bueno, y esto hizo que la gente ocultara su identidad política, pues que participaban en sindicatos o que tenían una orientación revolucionaria, y de hecho facilitó que 10 o 15 años después se generara un movimiento anticomunista bastante potente.
The McCarthyites were able to say, look, this person is a communist and they haven't been telling you. This person is a revolutionary, they're trying to overthrow things. They haven't been telling you, and so they must be dishonest.
Así que McCarthy tuvo la licencia para apuntar a los culpables de comunismo y decir que este señor está metido en este movimiento revolucionario y hay que acabar con él.
So, and I'm generalizing a lot of things that I'm saying.
Estoy generalizando mucho.
Just to get to what my point is, and I'm leaving a lot of things out.
Solo quiero llegar a mi idea principal y me estoy dejando muchas cosas en el tintero.
Okay. In response to that, there were a lot of splits and new organizations made that happened in the late 50s and the 60s. And this comprised what was called at the time the New Left.
A raíz de esto pues hubo muchas escisiones en los movimientos políticos a finales de los 50 y años 60 y nacería en ese momento lo que hemos dado en llamar la nueva izquierda.
And some of what could define this era is that these new organizations were looking for new ways to organize, looking for a new spin on things. And so a lot of what happened was people moved away geographically from the areas that where radical movements had been organized, where the working class was in mass, and moved to cities and focused on organizing students.
Esta época estuvo marcada así por nuevas formas, nuevos enfoques que encontrar y que se produjo un éxodo de las zonas donde había un mayor componente revolucionario de clase obrera hacia las grandes ciudades, donde el principal objetivo fueron los estudiantes.
And so another aspect that came up from doing these, from some of the new approaches that were taken, one of the new approaches was that this new left relied more on spectacle. It was more about what people could see, seeing, and spectacle had always been part of the movement. There's always been demonstrations, but a lot of what I see as the new left in the U.S. having focused on was primarily spectacle and no more organizing around labor.
De modo que este aspecto, ¿no?, más enfocado en el espectáculo, en lo que la gente veía, había existido siempre en parte, ¿no?, lo que son las manifestaciones, pero ahora en un enfoque muchísimo más concentrado en eso, ¿no?, en la cultura del espectáculo.
Also at the same time as this was happening, the existing unions, having chased out all the radicals, became much less effective, of course, and much more corroborating with the ruling class.
Claro, esto supuso apartarse de lo que era el movimiento sindical y los propios sindicalistas también, que habían perdido a grandes luchadores en su movimiento, pues también se diluyeron.
Obviously, because they're much less militant.
Hay menos militantes, claro.
So at the same time, so here you had a left focusing on students and focusing on every issue that we could focus on that wasn't around labor. And many of these issues should have been focused on from the beginning, but they weren't. During this time, though, it was substituted for organizing around labor. What happens when you have a movement that's focused mainly on students? I was a student, so I have nothing against students. But when you have a movement that focuses on students, then what that movement is going to turn into is very academic. Right?
Así que dado que la izquierda hace concentrar sus esfuerzos en los estudiantes en detrimento de lo que era la fuerza de trabajo, la masa laboral, se produjo una sustitución gradual y entonces esto llevó a que, claro, lo académico empezara a primar sobre lo laboral, ¿no? Sobre la fuerza de trabajo.
And not that we do need things to be academic, and we do need to organize students, but we don't need to only do that. And that's pretty much what was happening. There are models that have happened around the world where students then became radicalized and then went to work organized in places of work, and that's a different setup than what happened in the United States.
Está claro que necesitamos un punto académico, eso no es negativo. El problema viene dado cuando nos basamos exclusivamente en eso. Hay otras partes del mundo en las que los estudiantes pues, o han dejado de trabajar, se han radicalizado o han iniciado movimientos, pero no estamos hablando de que sucediera eso en Estados Unidos.
So, what happens if you're a professor and you have a class analysis and you're a revolutionary? What do? You publish, and you keep publishing, and people figure out new ways to say the same thing, new lingo, new jargon to say the same thing that they've been saying. And then at a certain point, that starts moving the line, that starts moving the actual theory, and the theory starts being guided by the need to create new theory, as opposed to guided by the need to organize the working class.
¿Qué pasa si eres un profesor revolucionario, tienes tu clase, pues que tu principal idea consiste fundamentalmente en publicar y publicar y publicar, y entonces entras en una espiral en la que solo se genera más jerga, más terminología, más teoría, y la propia teoría genera una necesidad mayor de generar teoría en vez de centrarse en cómo cambiar las cosas.
And an example of this to me, and I'm wondering, it must work in what a word that is very popular now in left academia is the idea of praxis, right? But praxis is redundant. You cannot have theory without practice. You cannot have practice without theory. It has to come from each other. The word praxis makes it seem like it's a special circumstance that comes about, that in which your theory comes from practice, or that your theory leads to practice.
Bueno, un ejemplo que quiero dar es que ahora mismo hay un término muy popular en la vida académica que es la praxis, pero se plantea como un término aislado, y la teoría y la praxis están relacionados. No puede haber teoría sin praxis ni praxis sin teoría, una debe llevar a la otra.
Well, I think I said theory and practice. Okay.
Theory and practice, and one must lead to the other.
Yeah, which is different from the praxis. Okay. So, so coming out of this, we have a left that's organized, that I came up in. I joined. I became involved in a revolutionary organization in the 80s when I was 15. A very sectarian organization that was not very effective, but nonetheless, I got a lot of the ideas that I needed to get out of it. What I came up in was a time, and which is still existing now, in which the left is trying to organize around every issue except around labor.
Bueno, abandonando...
Well, let me say this, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
In which radicals are trying, in which revolutionaries are organizing around every sector, every issue except labor.
Pues cuando tenía 15 años me impliqué en una organización bastante revolucionaria que tampoco llevaba a ningún sitio. Sin embargo me quedé con algunas ideas importantes al respecto y sin embargo la izquierda seguía revolucionaria, seguía dando vueltas a todo menos a lo que era la fuerza laboral, el trabajo como la base.
And so now we have a situation in which for instance, we have, I think, more of a focus on identity politics in the radical left than on what gives us power than what gives us the power to change, which is our connection with the working class.
Ahora tenemos una situación en la que la izquierda radical se concentra mucho en lo que es la política de la identidad, en lugar de lo que nos da fuerza en realidad, que es la fuerza laboral, el trabajo, los trabajadores.
So, I mean, and we also end up not even having the tool to handle these issues around identity, because the thing that makes people get over those problems is a need, right? So we can sit around here and talk about why we shouldn't be racist and what words are wrong to use, what words are sexist, and what words are wrong to use, and what actions are sexist and what's wrong to use. But the thing that's going to motivate us to actually change our ways is a need to unite. And we only are going to see that need while we're in struggle around something. We're not going to see that need in theory. We may agree with it, give lip service to it, but we're not going to actually, and when I say we, most people are not going to actually change their way of being without being in a struggle that needs them to change.
El problema es que ni siquiera tenemos las herramientas adecuadas para afrontar lo que es esa identidad política. Lo que hace superar los problemas es la necesidad, el conflicto, la lucha. Podemos estar dando vueltas al racismo, el sexismo y demás terminología, pero lo que sigue motivándonos es la necesidad, la lucha, el esfuerzo, el conflicto, y ninguna teoría nos va a dar eso.
So, without that center of organizing around labor, we end up floating around from issue to issue. Partly because we don't have the power. The radicals can call for whatever we want to, but we don't end up having the power to change it because we haven't been organizing for decades. Revolutionaries for decades in the U.S. and haven't been organizing where their power base is. So we can say we want all these things, we can show mass numbers in the streets at some points, but we can't affect the economic system because we're not organizing where we are. And it makes us spend most of our day organizing around in an opposite way from the way that we would think would be how we should do it. For instance, what most people do when they get out of school and they've got some radical politics in them is they join a nonprofit organization. Why? Because it's a job and it's working in the community. However, often the political line of that organization, while it seems like it's working for the community, is often very much the opposite of the class of putting out a class line. In the United States, we have problems with violence in the community, for instance.
Okay, I'll try. pues sin ese centro en torno al que gravitar, ¿no? Que sería la fuerza de la laboral, del trabajo, los revolucionarios andamos flotando en conceptos dispersos y no nos organizamos en torno a lo que es la verdadera fuerza de nuestro motor. Podemos, de hecho, hacemos que gire la forma opuesta. Quiero poner un ejemplo. Mucha gente al salir de la escuela, del colegio, se implica en lo que son asociaciones sin ánimo de lucro para intentar cambiar las cosas. Y en la superficie parece que es algo que ayuda, pero en realidad no sirve para enfrentarse a sentar o a establecer lo que son las líneas de la clase, ¿no? De la clase social, del conflicto de clases.
Yeah, so a lot of times those organizations are putting out a line to the community that's the opposite of a class analysis.
Sí que están ayudando a la comunidad de una forma contraria a lo que es un análisis de clase.
So, for instance, in many communities in the United States, especially poor communities, especially people of color communities, there's a problem of violence. People are killing each other. And what comes out from a lot of well-meaning folks on the left that are working in these organizations is this chant of stop the violence, right? And so they have classes in which young people can come and learn how to argue with each other in a nice way. Or they have classes in which people can come and learn to be a better father. Or they have classes that teach you how to manage your checkbook better. Right? All of these things that basically say that it is the culture of poor people that cause their problems.
Por ejemplo, este tipo de trabajo se lleva en pequeñas comunidades, sobre todo de color, en las que hay mucha violencia, la gente se mata entre ellos y muchas personas bien intencionadas de la izquierda pues vienen con el lema de parar la violencia y lo que quieren es que los niños vayan allí y aprendan a argumentar, a discutir civilizadamente sin darse navajazos, o a ser mejores padres o
or to learn how to manage their bills and their
organizarse su contabilidad personal doméstica, ¿no?
And all of these are things that say that it's the culture of poor people that's the problem.
Y todo esto en realidad viene a decir que el problema es la cultura de la gente pobre.
And but if you have a class line, you understand that capitalism must have unemployment in order to work. You cannot have full employment under capitalism. Because if you have full employment under capitalism, then the workers can demand higher pay without even striking. Because the boss can't threaten to fire anyone, because there's no one to hire.
En cambio, si hacemos el análisis de clase, nos damos cuenta de que el desempleo es consustancial al capitalismo, que es necesario para que funcione, porque si todo el mundo trabajara no habría posibilidad de hacer huelga, entonces los trabajadores podrían exigir una subida de sueldo y sin necesidad de hacer una huelga.
So they need a certain amount of unemployed people to keep wages low for the folks that are employed. We know this. This is something that's simple, and most radicals know this. Yet we get involved in struggles that act like they don't. That put out the line that is opposite to this. Because when there is a number of unemployed people, they have to eat too. Unemployed people have to eat too. If there are no jobs, unemployed people are going to have to turn to illegal business. Illegal business, just like legal business. Legal business uses violence in this way. If you go to a store store with a cart full of groceries and walk out without paying, you're going to be met by a force. That force is going to either just take the groceries back into the store, or it's going to arrest you, or it's going to beat you to death. But either way, there's a violent threat there. And that's what legal businesses have. They have violence to regulate their economy.
El capitalismo necesita el desempleo fundamentalmente para mantener unos sueldos bajos. Y eso es algo que los radicales pues sabemos y nos lleva a un enfoque equivocado en el sentido de que se genera lo que es una violencia, ¿no? Unos trabajos ilegales que son violentos, que generan una violencia intrínseca, y sin embargo no dejan de ser lo mismo que lo que son los trabajos legales, que también tienen su propia violencia. En un trabajo legal, pongamos, yo voy al supermercado con un carrito con mis pues la comida, la compra del mes, si yo me voy sin pagar, pues o bien me quitan la comida o me dan una paliza o me arrestan, ¿no? O sea, hay una violencia que se ejerce desde lo que es el trabajo legal igualmente.
Illegal business does not have the police at their beckoning to regulate business. So they regulate it themselves. That's supposed to be political. This laundry list of problems with the system. And because of the problems with the system, we should get angry. That's what a lot of political art tells us.
Al escuchar música, podemos calificar de política o radical, lo que asociamos a ella es un sentimiento de ira o de frustración. Esto sucede mucho en lo que es el punk o el hip hop, que fundamentalmente consiste en una lista de problemas que se tienen con el sistema y que generan esa ira, ¿no?
And sometimes there may be a sentiment of, let's burn it down.
Pues pueden soltar una frase, un verso de, vamos a quemarlo todo.
But often there is no optimism in it at all.
Pero a menudo carecen de optimismo en ningún tipo.
And that comes from not having an analysis that tells you we can win.
Eso se debe a que falta un análisis que diga, oye, podemos ganar.
Or that says how we can win.
Que diga, ¿cómo podemos ganar?
And we're only going to have that analysis by having a strong class analysis. And we're only going to be able to put out a strong class analysis to all these folks that are creating art if we are involved in class struggle, in a radical militant class struggle, which means that revolutionaries have to organize the sections of the working class that aren't organized. And by organize, I mean organize at places of work, at the job, so that we can use the withholding of labor as a tool in building a revolutionary movement.
Solo obtendremos ese análisis adecuado si hacemos un análisis de clase y comunicamos, y es la manera también de comunicar los radicales, ¿no? Las necesidades de análisis de lo que es organizarse en una militancia radical en los centros de trabajo y de esa manera establecer la retención del trabajo o la huelga como una forma de presión.
A lot of times with the same thing that the artist will say, well, you know, I'm making a song to change the world. And it's a cop-out for us. And, you know, I found myself, like, early on trying to really, when I was running away from organizing, thinking that hey, this is a cool thing. I can be an artist and I don't have to worry about whether a movement is built. I can say that I'm doing my part every day by writing songs.
Muchas veces los artistas dicen, bueno, voy a componer una canción para cambiar el mundo, y eso en ocasiones es una coartada, como yo mismo la utilicé cuando estaba huyendo de lo que eran los movimientos organizativos, y me dije a mí mismo, hoy pues puedo componer una canción y con eso cambiar las cosas a mi manera, ¿no? Fuera de lo que eran los movimientos organizativos.
And I think that I can do my part partially by writing songs, but the only way that I'm going to write the songs that are going to be effective is if I'm actually involved in organizations or campaigns that are trying to get some material changes, some immediate and long-term material changes.
Puedo hacer mi trabajo, lo que me corresponde en parte a través de la música, pero solo será eficaz si me implico en movimientos y organizaciones que quieran ejercer un cambio material a largo plazo.
But my position in saying that, feeling that way at one time, that I'll just do music and that'll be my job in changing the world, it's not much different from the position of, well, hey, you know, I believe there should be a revolution, but I'm just going to be a social worker. Or I believe there should be a revolution, but you know, I'm just going to organize with other people who already believe there's a revolution, there should be a revolution. This is something that we get into because we have a frustration. We see that there are hundreds of demonstrations and we don't see much change. And we get frustrated. We think that there's nothing that could happen. We think that, you know, we're just spinning our wheels. And we think that because we're not spinning the right wheels. We're not involved in the places that we could be.
Pues mi postura al pensar de que yo voy a escribir una canción para cambiar el mundo no es muy distinta de la de, por ejemplo, alguien que quiere hacer una revolución pero se dedica a ser un asistente social, o alguien que quiere hacer una revolución y se junta con otras personas que creen que debería haber una revolución también. Y yo creo que en la izquierda nos metemos por una frustración, este tipo de cosas. Vemos que se producen muchas manifestaciones, que no hay un cambio, y creo que eso responde a que no se toca lo que es la tecla adecuada.
So